Mommy, I'm cold. Those two words broke Jenny Callahan in half. She was already on her knees, not praying, not resting, digging through a laundry basket for anything thick enough to wrap around her 3-year-old son. Her hands were shaking. The thermostat on the wall read 50 degrees and was still dropping. Outside, the storm was swallowing Minnesota whole. She had $4.62 to her name, and then she heard the sound of thunder that wasn't thunder. If this story moves you, please subscribe, drop a comment telling me what city you were watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The furnace had been dying for 3 weeks. Jenny Callahan knew it, the way you know something is wrong with your body before the doctor tells you a feeling deep in the chest, a low warning hum beneath everything else. She had called the landlord twice. She had left 2 voicemails, both of which went unreturned. She had even slipped a handwritten note under the office door of the management company on her lunch break, the 1 15-minute break she allowed herself during her double shift at the diner. Nothing. And now it was January 14th, the coldest night in Minnesota in over 30 years, and the furnace wasn't dying anymore. It was dead. Jenny stood in the hallway of her small 2-bedroom house on the edge of Duluth and stared at the thermostat the way someone stares at an empty gas tank on the side of a highway. 50 degrees. She tapped the plastic casing with her fingernail as if that might fix it. The number didn't change. Mommy. She turned. Caleb was standing in the doorway to the living room in his sock feet, his dinosaur pajamas hanging loose on his small frame, his arms wrapped around himself. He was 3 years and 4 months old, and already he had learned that certain words, that specific combination of letters, could cut his mother open without her showing it. Hey, baby, she forced a smile. Come here. She scooped him up and held him against her chest, and she felt how cold his hands were against the back of her neck, and she had to close her eyes for a second to keep herself from making a sound that would scare him. Why is it cold? He asked. The heater's taking a little nap, she said. It'll wake up soon. Heaters don't sleep, Caleb said with the absolute authority of a 3-year-old who had recently learned that some things he'd been told were not entirely accurate. You're right, Jenny said quietly. They don't. She carried him to the couch and layered him under every blanket she owned, 4 of them, including the heavy quilted one her mother had given her before she passed, the one she usually kept folded on the top shelf because it was too precious to risk being ruined. She tucked it around his feet and then sat beside him and rubbed his legs through the fabric. Better, she asked. A little, he said. Then, Mommy, are we going to be okay? Jenny looked at her son. She looked at his face, wide eyes, round cheeks, the small, serious mouth that looked exactly like his father's mouth, which was a complicated thought she didn't have the energy to sit with tonight. Yes, she said, and she meant it with everything she had, even though she had no idea how to make it true. She had $4.62. The electric bill was 47 days past due. The gas account had been flagged for disconnection twice in the past 2 months, and she'd only avoided it by calling and begging and promising payments. She then scrambled to piece together by picking up extra shifts at the diner and doing overnight stocking at the grocery store 3 nights a week on top of her weekend cleaning job at the hotel on the hill. 3 jobs, 70, sometimes 80 hours a week, and still 50 degrees and dropping. She waited until Caleb's eyes grew heavy and his breathing slowed into sleep. Then she stood and walked to the window. The storm outside was unlike anything she had seen in her 31 years of Minnesota winters. The snow was nearly horizontal, driven by a wind that had been forecast to reach 50 miles per hour. The streetlights were barely visible through the white. Her car, a 2009 Honda Civic with a cracked manifold and a heater that worked only when it wanted to, was a buried shape at the end of the driveway. She wasn't going anywhere tonight. She thought about calling someone, her friend Darlene from the diner maybe. But Darlene lived 20 minutes away on a good night, and tonight was not a good night. She thought about calling 211, the community helpline, but the last time she'd called, they'd put her on hold for 40 minutes and then told her the Emergency Heating Assistance Fund was depleted until the next fiscal cycle. She thought about calling Caleb's father, and then she didn't think about that anymore. She went to the kitchen and opened the cabinet under the sink where she kept the space heater she'd bought secondhand at a garage sale the previous summer. She pulled it out and carried it to the living room and plugged it in. It made a clicking sound, then nothing. She clicked the switch again. Off and on, nothing. She sat down on the floor next to the couch where Caleb was sleeping, and she put her face in her hands and she allowed herself exactly 45 seconds. That was her rule. She'd had it since the night Caleb was born. The night his father didn't come to the hospital. The night she looked at this tiny screaming life and understood that she was completely alone in the most terrifying and beautiful way. 45 seconds. Then you stand up. She counted it out. She stood up. She went back to the kitchen and boiled water on the stove. Thank God the stove was gas. And the gas wasn't off yet, and filled 2 large pots, which she set on the floor of the living room, to radiate whatever warmth they could. She found a pair of Caleb's mittens and put them on her own hands. She put on her work coat, the heavy canvas one she wore when she walked to her car at 5 a.m., and she sat back down next to her sleeping son. She thought, I cannot keep doing this. And then immediately, I don't have a choice. And then she heard it. At first, she thought it was the storm, some new and violent variation of the wind that had been howling for hours. A low mechanical thunder coming from somewhere to the east, growing louder, fuller, more complex. Not like the wind at all, like engines, many of them. She got up and moved to the window. The street outside was empty and white, and then it wasn't. Lights, headlights, not one pair, not 2 dozens coming around the curve at the end of her block, in a slow procession that seemed impossible in the storm. Motorcycles, heavy, powerful machines that should not have been on the road tonight, that by every law of common sense should have been in garages or storage units or anywhere but a Minnesota street in a blizzard that had closed the interstate. But here they were, 1, 2, 4, a dozen, more. They pulled to the curb in front of and around her house, the way water finds the lowest point, inevitably fully taking up every available space. Engines rumbled down to silence one by one. Men climbed off. Big men, some of them enormous in leather and denim, and boots caked with snow. She could see the patches on the backs of their jackets even through the frosted glass. 3 words, Hell's Angels. Jenny stepped back from the window. Her heart was doing something she couldn't name, not quite racing, something more like seizing like a machine asked to do something it wasn't built for. Okay, she whispered to herself. Okay. She picked up her phone, looked at it. She had 9% battery. She'd forgotten to charge it again, which happened when you worked until 11 at night and fell asleep on the couch. She opened her contacts and looked at the number for the non-emergency police line, and she held the phone and stood very still. The knock at the door was not aggressive. It was heavy, the kind of knock a large hand makes simply by existing, but it was measured, not demanding, almost careful. Jenny didn't move. The knock came again. Then a voice. Ma'am. Deep, rough at the edges, but something in the delivery that wasn't threatening. We can see the lights on. We don't mean any trouble. We're stuck out here, and we got guys who aren't dressed for this temperature. I'm asking for shelter. Just for the night. Jenny looked at her son on the couch. She looked at the door. She thought about what her mother used to say. Her mother, who had grown up with nothing in rural Wisconsin and had a way of making large statements in very small sentences. Her mother used to say, you can always tell a man's character by what he does in bad weather. She'd meant it about moral weather, about the storms life brings. But Jenny stood there and applied it literally, and something shifted. How many of you, she said, not opening the door? A pause. 36. 36. She said it out loud, not as a question, just to hear the number in the air. Yes, ma'am. That's a lot of people. It is, the voice agreed. No argument, no justification. Another pause. Then, we got a kid with us, 19-year-old prospect new rider. His hands are blue. I'm not asking for me, I'm asking for him. Jenny closed her eyes. She thought of Caleb's hands against the back of her neck. She opened the door. The man on her porch was somewhere in his 50s, built like a barn with silver threading through his dark beard and eyes that were, and this was the thing she kept coming back to later, the thing that was hardest to explain, tired. Not dangerous tired, not predatory tired, just tired the way people get tired when they've been holding something heavy for a very long time. Mike, he said. He didn't offer a hand, which she understood was perhaps a courtesy, not presuming familiarity, not pushing. Jenny, she said. Jenny. He nodded once respectfully, the way an older man of a different generation acknowledges an introduction. We won't be any trouble to you. I give you my word on that, and my word means something. I don't know you, Jenny said. No, Mike said. You don't. You're opening your door anyway. He met her eyes. That takes guts, more guts than most people have. She stepped back. Come in. They came in. 36 men. They came through her front door in a steady stream, and each of them, every single one, paused on the threshold and knocked the snow off their boots before stepping onto her floor. She noticed that. She filed it away. Men who knock their boots off without being asked are men who understand they are guests. Her living room, her small dining room, her kitchen, every surface that could hold a human being held one. Some sat on the floor without being asked to make room. Some leaned against walls. A few settled on the stairs. They were quiet, quieter than she would have expected, and she saw several of them look at Caleb sleeping on the couch, and then look away respectfully, deliberately, as if they understood, without being told, that the child's sleep was the most important thing in the room. Mike stood in the middle of the living room and looked around with the practiced efficiency of someone who is used to assessing situations. "Your heat's out," he said. "Not a question." "Furnace died." "How long?" "Tonight." Mike turned. Shepard, a man who was roughly the size of a refrigerator, separated from the group. "Furnace, take Ricky and Luis." "On it," Shepard said. He said it the way someone says words they've said 10,000 times before, completely without drama, completely without fanfare. Just on it. And then he was moving toward the basement door with two others behind him. "Wait," Jenny said. "You can't just—" "He's the best mechanic in 4 states," Mike said. "If it can be fixed tonight, he'll fix it. If it can't, he'll tell you straight." He looked at her. "Is that all right?" She wanted to say, "You can't just walk into my house and start taking it over." She wanted to say, "I don't know you. I don't know any of you. I need you to stay where I can see you." She wanted to say a great many things. What she said was, "Yeah, that's all right." A man named Dex, she learned his name because the others used it like punctuation, appeared at her elbow with a paper grocery bag. "We had supplies in the saddlebags," he said. "Road food, nothing fancy. But there's enough here to make something hot if you'll let us use your kitchen." Jenny looked in the bag. Canned soup, a package of crackers, energy bars, a sealed container of beef jerky, a small bag of dried fruit. "You carry groceries on motorcycles," she said. "Winter riding, you always carry supplies," Dex said. "You get stranded, you need to eat. It's just how it is." He shrugged a massive shrug, the shrug of a man whose shoulders were built to shrug impressively. "We got more in some of the other bags. Probably enough for all of us, if we stretch it." Jenny looked at the bag. She thought of the near-empty refrigerator behind her. She thought of Caleb, who would be hungry when he woke up. "The big pot is on the stove," she said. "Burners work fine." "Yes, ma'am." They cooked in her kitchen. 36 bikers, the majority of whom apparently knew exactly what they were doing in a kitchen, filling her small house with the smell of hot soup and something that was almost not quite, but almost warmth. And then from the basement, a sound, a cough, a rumble, a groan of old metal being persuaded back to life, and then heat. Jenny felt it before she heard anything, a faint rush of warm air from the vent near the baseboards, tentative at first, then stronger. She stood in the middle of her living room, surrounded by leather-jacketed strangers, and felt the air temperature begin to climb, and something happened in her chest that she didn't have a name for, something that had been clenched for so long she'd forgotten it was clenched. Mike was watching her. "Told you," he said simply. "How did he?" "Cracked heat exchanger and a failed igniter," Shepard said, emerging from the basement stairs with grease on his hands and a look of professional satisfaction that Jenny recognized, the look of someone who has done their job well and knows it. "I wired around the igniter with a piece we had in the kit. It's not a permanent fix. You'll need a new igniter in the spring, but it'll hold through the winter if you don't push it past 70. Jenny stared at him. "Thank you," she said. And the words felt completely insufficient, and she knew it, and she said them anyway because they were all she had. Shepard nodded the same single nod that Mike had offered at the door. Whatever language these men spoke between them, that nod was a complete sentence. From the couch, a small voice. "Mommy." Caleb was awake. He was sitting up in his nest of blankets, his hair wild, blinking at the room full of enormous strangers with the pure, unfiltered wonder of a 3-year-old who has not yet learned that the world is supposed to be frightening. "Hey, baby," Jenny said, moving quickly to the couch. "It's okay. These are just—" She hesitated. "These are some people who needed help tonight, like us." Caleb looked around the room. 36 pairs of eyes looked carefully away to the walls, the floor, their hands giving the child space, not pressing in. Then Caleb's gaze landed on Mike, who was the closest, and Caleb pointed at Mike's beard with a directness that only the very young can get away with. "Your beard is really big," Caleb announced. Several of the men near the walls made sounds that might have been laughter suppressed at great effort. Mike looked at the boy for a moment with an expression Jenny could not entirely read, something old in it, something that had lived for a while behind whatever face Mike usually showed the world. "It is," Mike said. "I've been told that before." "Does it keep you warm?" Caleb asked. "A little," Mike said seriously. "Not as warm as a good blanket." Caleb considered this with the gravity it deserved. Then he held out a corner of his dinosaur blanket. "You can share mine," he said. "It's really warm. My grandma made it." The room went very quiet. Mike looked at the blanket and then at the boy and Jenny saw this clearly. She would swear to it later. His jaw tightened the way a jaw tightens when you are holding something in. "That's real kind of you, son," Mike said. "You keep it, but thank you." Jenny put her arm around Caleb and held him, and over the top of her son's head, she looked at this man, this large, road-worn, leather-armored man, and she thought I opened the door to the right person. She didn't know yet how right she was. She didn't know what morning would bring. She didn't know what 36 men would say when they went back out into the world. She didn't know about the call Mike would make as soon as the storm allowed a signal. She didn't know about the voicemail that would spread through a network she couldn't have imagined. She didn't know any of it yet. Right now, she knew that the heat was on. Her son was awake and warm and offering a blanket to a stranger with a big beard, and the soup on her stove smelled like something that might just barely count as a miracle. She knew that she had opened a door. She had no idea yet what else was about to walk through it. The soup was gone by 10 o'clock. Not slowly, not politely, picked it gone. Every drop. Jenny had watched 36 grown men eat from her largest pot with the quiet efficiency of people who understood that food was fuel and waste was something none of them could afford. They passed bowls. They passed crackers. One man, a quiet one named Torres, who hadn't said 10 words since he came through the door, produced a second can of soup from somewhere inside his jacket, like a magician pulling something from a coat he'd been saving all night, and he held it out to Jenny without comment, without ceremony, without asking for thanks. "I was saving it," he said, "in case." "In case of what?" Jenny asked. "In case someone needed it more than me." He shrugged. "Looks like someone did." She heated it and gave the first bowl to Caleb, who ate with both hands on the bowl the way he always did, as though the soup might escape if he didn't hold it down. The men around the room watched him eat with the kind of careful peripheral attention that people use when they don't want to be caught looking, because looking too directly at a child eating, when you are a grown adult in a stranger's house, feels like an intrusion. And these men, whatever else they were, understood the difference between looking and intruding. Mike sat on the floor near the hallway with his back against the wall and his long legs stretched out, and a cup of black coffee Jenny had made from the last of her grounds. She'd been stretching them for 4 days, adding less each morning, and she didn't think about that now because now there was a reason to use them all at once. He held the cup in both hands and stared at a point somewhere in the middle distance, and Jenny from across the room watched him the way you watch someone when you're trying to figure out if the person in front of you matches the story you told yourself about them. He didn't match. That was the problem. She had a story ready. She'd had it assembled the moment she saw the patches on their jackets. Hell's Angels. A name that arrived in most people's minds, preloaded with every news story, every warning, every mother's instinct pulled tight as a wire. She had her story: dangerous men, unpredictable men, men you did not invite into your home at 11 at night in a blizzard unless you had no other choice. Except she'd had a choice. That was the thing she couldn't get comfortable with. She had stood at that door with her phone in her hand and 9% battery, and she had made a choice, and now 36 of them were in her house drinking her last coffee, and the heat was on, and her son was warm and full, and talking. He was always talking, Harleb. He had been a verbal child since roughly 14 months and had not stopped, and the man on the floor with the big silver beard was listening to her 3-year-old describe in extraordinary detail the dietary habits of the Tyrannosaurus Rex. "They ate other dinosaurs," Caleb was explaining, standing in front of Mike with his blanket draped over his shoulders like a cape. "Not vegetables, because they were carnivores. That means meat eaters. Do you know what you are?" "I'm going to say carnivore," Mike said. "Right," Caleb said, satisfied. "Me too, mostly." A man named Garrett, who was sitting on the stairs and who had the look of someone who had laughed loudly and frequently for most of his life, made no effort whatsoever to hide his grin. Jenny caught his eye from the kitchen doorway. "You like this all the time?" Garrett asked quietly. "Every waking minute," Jenny said. "Must be exhausting." "It's the best thing in my life." Garrett nodded slowly, the grin softening into something more considered. "Yeah," he said, "I bet it is." It was around 11 when Mike stood up, and the simple act of him standing made the room shift, not from fear Jenny realized, but from attention. These men oriented to him the way a group orients to whoever the room has decided is the center of gravity. Not aggressively, just naturally. "All right," he said, not loudly, but in the register that carries. "Sleep rotation, 4-hour shifts. Nobody takes the couch or the beds. Those belong to Jenny and the boy. Floor and walls only. Garrett, you've got first watch on the door." "Watch," Jenny said. "What does that mean, watch on the door?" Mike looked at her steadily. "It means in a storm like this, sometimes people come to doors who aren't asking the way we asked. It means nobody comes into this house tonight that you haven't said can come in." He said it without any theater. "You've got a 3-year-old. You've got no working vehicle. You let us in, the least we can do is make sure nobody else makes that decision for you." Jenny opened her mouth, closed it. "I don't know whether to be grateful or unsettled," she said honestly. "Both is reasonable," Mike said. "But tonight, just be grateful. The unsettled can wait for morning." She almost smiled. She didn't quite, but it was close. Caleb fell asleep again, around 11:30 this time, faster and deeper. The way children sleep when they feel safe, utterly, completely, the sleep of someone who has fully outsourced their worry to an adult they trust. Jenny tucked him in and stood over him for a moment in the near dark and listened to the breathing of 36 men settling into the arrangement of her house and the wind outside and the furnace doing its job, and she thought, "This is one of the strangest nights of my life." She thought it almost with wonder. She went back to the kitchen because she couldn't sleep. She'd never been good at sleeping when there were things to think about. And right now, there were many things to think about. And she was standing at the counter looking at nothing in particular when she heard a sound from behind her. A chair scraping, someone sitting down at her kitchen table. She turned. It was a young man, the one Mike had mentioned, the prospect, the 19-year-old, whose hands had been blue. He was small for the company he was keeping lean in a way that suggested he'd grown up without a lot of margin, with dark circles under his eyes, and a quality of trying very hard that Jenny recognized because she saw it in her mirror every morning. His name, she would learn, was Danny. "Sorry," he said immediately. "I can go back out." "Sit down," Jenny said. "You want more coffee? I'm making more." "I don't want to use your Danny." She said his name with a firmness that surprised her. "Sit down." He sat. She made coffee. Real coffee this time. She'd found a backup can in the back of the cabinet behind the baking soda, the emergency reserve she'd forgotten about, and she was unreasonably glad about it. "How old are you, actually?" she asked, setting a mug in front of him. 19, he said, then and a half. The and a half did something to her. Only people who are 19 say and a half. After 20, the halves stop mattering. "Where are you from?" "Ohio," he said. "Cleveland." "You rode a motorcycle from Cleveland to Minnesota in January." He wrapped his hands around the mug. "It started in October," he said. "The ride. It was supposed to be a shorter trip." "What happened?" He was quiet for a moment. "A lot of things." Then, "It's Mike and the guys, they took me in after my mom passed. Last year, I didn't have anywhere to go. My dad's been gone since I was 8. And I was..." He stopped, looked at the table. "I was heading somewhere bad. And Mike, he pulled me back before I got there. I don't know how to explain it. He showed up." Jenny sat down across from him and wrapped her own hands around her mug and said nothing, because sometimes saying nothing is the most honest response. "He does that?" Danny said. "Shows up. It's like he has this radar for people who are about to fall." "How did he know about you?" "Friend of a friend. He came to Cleveland, knocked on the door of the house I was crashing in, and said he'd heard I was good with engines." Danny almost smiled. "I'm not even that good with engines. But he said he needed someone who wasn't afraid of hard work and didn't have anything to lose." He looked up. "I fit the description." Jenny studied the young man across her table, this boy from Cleveland, who had lost everything and been picked up off the floor by a man with a big beard and a Hell's Angels patch, and she thought about the way certain people move through the world like a current pulling others along without meaning to. The way Mike had pulled this boy, the way she herself had been pulled tonight by something she still didn't have a name for. Were you scared? She asked. When you all stopped here? Of you, a flash of something genuine, not quite humor, but close. Yeah, a little. Of me. You opened the door, he said, and the way you looked at us, you were scared anybody could see that. But you opened the door anyway. He shook his head slowly. I wouldn't have done that. I'm pretty sure most people wouldn't have done that. I almost didn't, Jenny said, but you did. The kitchen was quiet for a moment, just the furnace running and the wind outside pressing against the windows and the distant sound of men shifting in their sleep in the other rooms. You remind me of her. Danny said then so quietly she almost missed it. Your mom? He nodded, didn't look up. She worked 3 jobs, he said. We never talked about it like it was hard. She just did it, like it was the most normal thing in the world, like there was no other way. His jaw tightened. I didn't appreciate it enough. When I was a kid, I didn't understand what it cost. Jenny felt something move through her. Not pity, something more like recognition, the way you feel when someone articulates something that has been living in you unnamed for a long time. She knew you loved her, Jenny said. You don't know that. I know it, Jenny said. Trust me, she knew. Danny looked at her then, and for a moment he looked exactly like what he was, a boy of 19 and a half who had lost his mother and was trying to figure out how to be a person in a world without her in it. And Jenny held his gaze and didn't look away. Because sometimes what someone needs most is just to be looked at without flinching. He didn't cry. He came close, but he didn't. You should sleep, Jenny said. You've got a long ride tomorrow. Yes, ma'am, he said and stood and then paused at the kitchen doorway. Thank you for opening the door. I know it wasn't easy. No, she said, it wasn't. He went back to the living room. Jenny sat at her kitchen table alone with her coffee and the sound of the storm, and she thought about 3 jobs and 19 and a half and what it costs, and she thought about Caleb sleeping 2 rooms away, and she thought about all the doors that had been closed to her in the past 3 years, and all the doors she had kept closed herself out of pride or fear, or the particular exhaustion that comes from needing help so long that you forget it's allowed. She thought, I opened a door tonight. She wasn't sorry. She was still sitting there, her coffee cold, the kitchen quiet, when Mike appeared in the doorway the way a large person sometimes appears suddenly, as though he materialized rather than walked. Couldn't sleep either, Jenny said. Never sleep well in strange places. He looked around the kitchen. Mine, chair's right there. He sat. He didn't take coffee, didn't ask for anything, just sat in the way a large man sits when he is trying to take up as little space as possible, which she was beginning to understand was a thing he did deliberately. You talked to Danny, he said. He talked to me, she said. There's a difference. Mike almost smiled. Yeah, there is. He looked at the table. He's a good kid. Had everything pulled out from under him all at once. Sometimes that either breaks people or it builds them. I'm trying to make sure he gets built. Is that what you do? Jenny asked. Build people. I try. A pause. Doesn't always work. Why does it matter to you? The question sat there between them. Mike looked at it. Jenny could almost see him looking at it, turning it over, deciding how much of an answer to give. I had someone do it for me once, he said finally. Long time ago, He stopped, started again differently. I was heading somewhere bad, and someone showed up, knocked on the door. His eyes moved briefly to the window, to the white dark outside, and came back. I've been trying to pay it forward ever since. That's all. Jenny looked at this man. This man she had let into her house out of desperation and empathy, and something she still couldn't name, and she felt the story she'd built about him reshaping itself in real time, the way a picture comes clear when you get close enough to see it properly. Can I ask you something? She said. You can ask. Were you scared tonight on the road in the storm? Mike considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Not scared, he said, worried. There's a difference. Scared is about yourself. Worried is about the people you're responsible for. He glanced toward the living room where his men were sleeping. I've got 35 people who trust me to make the right call. That matters more than being scared. Jenny was quiet. Then from the living room, a sound that both of them heard at the same moment, a soft, sleepy voice. Mommy. Jenny was on her feet before Caleb finished the word. She went to him, sat on the edge of the couch, put her hand on his forehead. He was warm but not feverish. Just awake. Just checking. "I'm here," she said. "Go back to sleep." "Is the heater still on?" "Still on." "Good." He closed his eyes, then opened them one more time. "Mommy, is the big beard man still here?" "He's right in the kitchen." "Okay." And just like that, with the simple, complete trust of a 3-year-old, Caleb closed his eyes and went back to sleep, because the big beard man was in the kitchen, and that was apparently sufficient. Jenny stood and walked back to the kitchen doorway. Mike was already pulling out his phone. The screen lit his face and she saw his expression change. The steady, considered mask of a man managing a situation she shifted into something she had not seen from him before. Surprise. "What is it?" she said. He looked up from the phone, looked at her. "Signal came back," he said. "That's good." "I've got 47 missed calls," he said. He said it flatly, but she heard something moving underneath it. "And 112 texts." Jenny felt something change in the air between them, some atmospheric shift she couldn't identify. "From who?" she said. Mike stood. He was very still for a moment, reading something on his screen, and then he read it again, and the expression on his face was not surprise anymore. It was something bigger than surprise. "From every chapter," he said quietly. "Every chapter within 500 miles. "What does that mean?" Jenny asked. He looked at her, and in his eyes was something she would think about for a long time, after something that looked almost like awe in a man who did not look like someone easily moved to awe. "Someone made a call," he said. "Before the signal went out tonight, one of my guys, told people where we were, told them what was happening." He paused. "Told them about you." Jenny's heart did something irregular. "What did they say?" she said. "About me." Mike looked at his phone, then at her. That a single mother with a sick furnace and a 3-year-old opened her door to 36 strangers in a blizzard, he said. That she had nothing but she gave what she had. He set the phone on the table face up where she could see the screen but not yet read the messages. "They're asking where you live, Jenny." The furnace ran on. The storm pressed against the windows. Caleb breathed quietly in the next room. "Why?" she said. Though some part of her, the part that had stood at the door with her phone in her hand and opened it anyway, already knew. "Because in this world," Mike said, "when one of ours is shown grace, the rest of us show up." He looked at her steadily. "All of us." Jenny stood in her kitchen at 12:40 in the morning with her cold coffee and her warm house and her sleeping son, and looked at this man who had knocked on her door 4 hours ago, and she felt the ground shift under her feet in a way that had nothing to do with the storm. "How many?" she said. Mike picked up the phone again, read, set it back down. "By morning," and he said, "could be 3,000. 3,000. Jenny said the number out loud quietly, the way you say something when your brain refuses to process it silently. 3,000. "Give or take," Mike said. Give or take." She repeated that too. "You're telling me 3,000 Hell's Angels are coming here, to my house, on my street, in Duluth, Minnesota." "Not all at once," Mike said, and then immediately, "Actually, maybe all at once, depends on the roads." Jenny sat down. Not gracefully, she sat down the way your legs decide for you. She put both palms flat on the kitchen table and breathed through her nose and stared at the wood grain and thought about her neighbors, specifically about Mrs. Paulson next door, who was 73 and had called the non-emergency line once because a food delivery driver idled in the street for 4 minutes. "My neighbor's going to have a cardiac event," Jenny said. Mike actually smiled at that. A real one, not the careful, almost smile she'd seen earlier. It changed his face completely, and she filed that away too. "We'll be respectful," he said. 3,000 motorcycles are going to pull up at dawn, and you're going to be respectful." "Yes, ma'am." "On my street." "Yes, ma'am." Jenny pressed her fingers against her temples. "Wake up," she said, and this time the word came from a different place, not the practical place that wanted logistics, but the deeper place that wanted to understand something that felt too large to understand. "I'm nobody. I'm a waitress in Duluth who works 3 jobs and can't keep her furnace running. Why does this matter to 3,000 people?" Mike was quiet for a moment. He picked up his coffee cup, found it empty, set it back down. "You know what our world looks like from the outside," he said. It wasn't a question. "You had a picture of us. I saw it on your face when you opened the door." Jenny didn't deny it. Most people close the door, Mike said. Most people look through the peephole and go dark and wait for us to leave. And I understand it. I'm not angry about it. I understand it. We look like what we look like. He leaned back in the chair. But you opened the door. And you didn't just open it. You stepped back and let us in and made us coffee and let Shepard go into your basement and didn't panic when 36 strangers filled up every room in your house. He paused. Do you understand how rare that is? I was terrified, Jenny said. I know you were, Mike said. That's the whole point. You were terrified and you did it anyway. That's not just kindness, Jenny. That's courage. He looked at her directly. People in our world don't forget courage. Not ever. Jenny sat with that. The furnace ran. The wind was quieter now, she noticed still there, but something had shifted in it. Some of the fury gone out of it, the way a crying child eventually exhausts the worst of its grief. What are they going to do when they get here, she asked. Whatever needs doing, Mike said simply. That's how it works. You call people, show up, they look around, they find what needs fixing. They fix it. My furnace is already fixed. Then they'll find something else. He said it with complete calm, as if this were obvious. There's always something else. Jenny thought about her car in the driveway with the cracked manifold. She thought about the section of gutter on the east side of the house that had been pulling away from the fascia since October. She thought about the electric bill and the past due notices in the kitchen drawer she never opened anymore because opening it made her stomach hurt. She thought, I can't accept this. And then immediately, why not? That was the question that had been sitting at the center of everything all night, and she finally looked at it straight. Why not? She had been taught by circumstance, by pride, by 3 years of doing everything alone, that accepting help was a form of weakness or obligation or vulnerability she couldn't afford. She had been taught that needing things meant you were behind, and being behind meant you were failing. And failing was not something she was allowed to do because there was a 3-year-old boy in the next room whose entire world was her. But Caleb had offered his blanket tonight. He'd held out the corner of his grandmother's quilt to a large, bearded stranger without hesitation, without calculation, without a single thought about whether the stranger deserved it or whether he'd get it back. 3 years old, and he already understood something she'd spent years unlearning. Okay, Jenny said. Mike raised an eyebrow. Okay, she said again. They can come. Mike nodded once the single nod she was beginning to read as his highest register of approval and picked up his phone. She went to check on Caleb, still sleeping, still perfectly calm, one fist curled near his face the way he'd slept since he was an infant. She stood over him for a long moment and watched him breathe and felt the particular ache that lives in the center of loving someone this much. Then she went to her bedroom, lay down on top of the covers with her coat still on, and stared at the ceiling. She did not sleep. She heard the men shifting in the other rooms. She heard Garrett murmur something to someone near the front door, heard a low response. She heard the wind outside losing its argument with the storm's own exhaustion. She heard her house, her small, insufficient, beloved house, doing what houses do when they're full of people, settling, sighing, holding. At 4:30 in the morning, she heard the first engine. She was out of bed before she was fully awake. She moved to the window and looked out and saw a single headlight at the far end of the street moving slowly through the remnant snow. Then another. Then 3 more. They came without fanfare, without revving, without any of the theatrical arrivals she might have imagined. They came the way dawn comes gradually, and then all at once, filling the street with a quiet, mechanical procession that somehow, against all logic, did not feel threatening. It felt like something arriving. She heard Mike's voice from the living room, low, quick, directional. She heard movement men, waking the particular sounds of people, orienting themselves after a few hours on a stranger's floor. She heard the front door open, felt the cold exhale of outside air reach her even in the bedroom, and she heard voices of Mike's and another deeper one outdoors. She put on her shoes and went out to the porch. The street was filling in Yormung. Not chaotically, methodically the way people move when they've been organized by someone who understands logistics. Motorcycles were parking in rows with mechanical precision, 2 wheels from the curb engines, shutting down in sequence like lights going off in a building. And the men and some women, she saw that now women in the same leather and denim, women with the same patches and the same watchful eyes. They were gathering in clusters on the street, speaking in low voices, and every few seconds one of them would look toward her porch, toward her. She crossed her arms against the cold and stood on her porch and looked back. A woman separated from the nearest group and walked toward the porch. She was perhaps 60 with gray-streaked hair pulled back and a face that had lived in it hard and come through it interesting. She stopped at the porch steps. "You, Jenny," she said. "Yes. I'm Val, Milwaukee chapter." She said it the way people say where they're from when where they're from matters. "I drove 4 hours." "In this weather," Jenny said, not accusing, just acknowledging. "My roads were clearer than Mike's." Val put one boot on the porch step. "Can I tell you something?" "Okay. I've been riding with this club for 22 years, Val said. "I have never, not once in 22 years, seen every chapter within 500 miles mobilize overnight for a civilian." She held Jenny's gaze. "Do you understand what that means?" "I'm starting to," Jenny said quietly. "Good," Val nodded, "because I want to make sure you don't spend the next few hours feeling like a charity case. You're not. You're the reason." Val put her hand briefly on Jenny's arm, a quick, firm press there and gone. Big difference. Before Jenny could respond, the front door opened behind her and Caleb appeared. Because of course he did, because the child had an instinct for the exact moment Jenny needed to hold it together that was utterly supernatural. He was in his dinosaur pajamas with his blanket cape still attached, and he looked at the street full of motorcycles and people and said with perfect 3-year-old sincerity, "Whoa." Val looked at him. Something moved across her face fast, almost hidden, but Jenny saw it. "Is that him?" Val said. "That's Caleb," Jenny said. Val crouched down to Caleb's level, which for a 60-year-old woman in motorcycle boots took some doing, and she looked at him seriously. "Hi, Caleb." "Hi," Caleb said. "Did you ride a motorcycle?" "I did." "In the snow?" "In the snow." Caleb absorbed this. "Was it scary?" "A little," Val said, "but some things are worth being a little scared for." Caleb nodded with enormous gravity, the nod of a person who has just received information that confirms something he already believed. "That's what my mommy does," he said. "She does scary things, so I'm okay." Val stood up slowly. She didn't look at Jenny. For a moment she looked at the street, at the growing gathering of people, at the gray lightning sky. When she looked back, her eyes were bright. "Yeah," she said. "I know she does." Then Mike was at Jenny's shoulder, and the logistics of the morning began. It began with her car. 4 men Jenny hadn't met yet materialized beside the Honda Civic in the driveway, with a focus that suggested they had been briefed, and she realized Mike must have said something, must have described the situation in whatever communication had gone out the previous night, because they had parts. Actual parts. A man named Ortega held up a manifold gasket still in the packaging and said 2009 Civic right. And when she said yes, he turned to the others and said, "Let's go," and that was that. "How did you know?" Jenny asked Mike. "I told them what I saw," Mike said. "Car in the driveway, older model Honda. Someone looked up common issues and brought likely parts." He said it like it was nothing. "We have a lot of mechanics." "You have a lot of everything," Jenny said. "Yes," Mike agreed. "We do." By 6 in the morning, there were more than 200 people on her street. By 6:30, the number had doubled. They came with tools, and they came with food. Actual food, not road food. Someone had stopped at an all-night grocery and come with bays, and someone else had brought a propane camp stove and was making breakfast on the sidewalk, which was so surreal that Jenny stood and watched it for a full minute before she could move. A woman named Rosa Short, fierce with the energy of someone who has never wasted a single minute of her life, appeared at Jenny's elbow with a clipboard. Jenny stared at the clipboard. "What is that list?" Rosa said briskly. "Mike said the gutter on the east side is pulling away. We've got the guys for that. I need to know about the electric bill situation." That's private." "How past due?" Rosa said, not unkindly, but with the absolute directness of someone who has had this conversation before and knows that dancing around numbers helps no one. Jenny's jaw tightened. This was the hard part. This was the part that felt like charity, like surrender, like every prideful reflex she'd built over 3 years of going it alone. 47 days, she said. Rosa wrote it down. Gas flagged twice, current for now. Landlord's contact for the furnace repair will want Shepard to document what he did, so you have it in writing for liability. You thought about that? Honey, I'm a paralegal in my other life. Rosa looked up from the clipboard. You have any legal issues with the landlord's failure to maintain habitability questions? Jenny blinked. He hasn't returned my calls about the furnace for 3 weeks. Rosa wrote something down with what Jenny could only describe as aggressive satisfaction. Okay, we're going to want to talk about that. From the living room came Caleb's voice, bright and carrying, I want to say hi to the motorcycles. And then Danny's voice, patient and warm. Okay, buddy, boots first. Where are your boots? Jenny turned. Through the doorway, she could see Danny on one knee in the living room, helping Caleb pull on his small snow boots. Caleb holding Danny's shoulder for balance, chattering about something. Danny, nodding along with complete attention, the way someone listens when they're not performing. Listening but actually doing it. Something broke open quietly in Jenny's chest. She turned back to Rosa. The landlord's name is Gerald Mack, she said. Management company is Mack Property Group. I have the voicemail saved. Rosa smiled, sharp and satisfied. Perfect. By 7 in the morning, the number on the street had passed 500 and they were still coming. The neighbor, Mrs. Paulson, appeared on her own porch and stood looking at the street with an expression Jenny couldn't read from a distance. Jenny watched her, braced for it, braced for the alarm, the complaint, the call to someone about what was happening to the neighborhood. Instead, Mrs. Paulson went back inside and came back out with a plate of cookies. She walked Anne, 73 years old, in her housecoat and boots, to the edge of the growing group on the sidewalk and held out the plate, and a man twice her size and covered in ink took a cookie and said thank you. And Mrs. Paulson patted his arm and said, You all came a long way. It's cold. Jenny watched this and felt something she had no word for, something in the territory between laughing and crying that she'd been navigating all night. Mike appeared beside her again. He had a quality of appearing she'd given up trying to track how he moved. 700, and he said, as of 10 minutes ago, more coming from Wisconsin, some from Iowa. Iowa, Jenny said faintly. Story traveled fast. What story? Jenny said. What exactly did you tell them? Mike was quiet for a moment, looking at the street. The truth, and he said, single mothers, 3 jobs, no heat, 3-year-old son, opened her door in a blizzard to 36 strangers because someone was cold. He paused. That's the whole story. That's all I sent. Jenny thought about that small paragraph traveling through a network of thousands in the dark hours of a Minnesota winter night, gathering people the way a river gathers water from every elevation it passes through. Mike, she said. She didn't know how to finish it. You don't have to say anything, he said. I know, she said, but I want to. She looked at him. When Caleb is old enough to understand tonight, and I'm going to make sure he is old enough to understand it, I'm going to make sure I tell him all of it. What do I tell him was the reason. Mike was quiet for a long time. A motorcycle started somewhere down the block. The propane stove hissed. Rosa's clipboard clicked. Tell him someone was cold, Mike said finally. And his mother opened the door. And that one act of decency, one real, genuine, scared, but did it anyway act of human decency, has a weight to it that most people underestimate. He looked at her. Tell him the world keeps score of those moments, even when nobody's watching, even when you think nobody sees. Jenny breathed in cold morning air. Tell him the world saw, Mike said. And then Caleb came barreling through the front door in his boots and his blanket cape with Danny right behind him, and he stopped at the porch railing and looked at the street, at the hundreds of people and the rows of machines and the gray sky going amber at the edges with the first real light of dawn. And he turned to his mother with his whole face lit up like something enormous had just become clear to him. Mommy sang, he said. They all came. Jenny put her hand on her son's back between his small shoulder blades and felt him breathing. Yeah, baby, she said. They all came. From the far end of the street, more headlights turned the corner and kept coming. By 8 in the morning, the number had crossed 1,000. Jenny knew it not because anyone told her, though Rosa was updating her clipboard with the frequency of a field general tracking troop movements, but because she felt it. The street had a sound now, a collective human hum that she felt in her sternum before she heard it with her ears. Voices, movement, the particular frequency of many people doing purposeful things in the same place at the same time. She was standing on her porch with a cup of coffee that had gone cold in her hands when a man she hadn't seen before came up the porch steps 2 at a time, stopped in front of her, and held out a card. She looked at it, a business card. Gerald Mack, Mack Property Group, Property Management Services. Where did you get this? Jenny said. Rosa, the man said. He was maybe 45, broad-shouldered, with a calm in his eyes that suggested he had been in many rooms where things needed to be settled and had settled most of them. "My name's Frank. I'm an attorney. Chicago chapter." He said it the way someone says they're a doctor at a dinner party, not to impress, just to clarify relevance. "I specialize in tenant rights and habitability law. Rosa showed me what you told her about the furnace, the 3 weeks of unreturned calls, the voicemails you saved." Jenny looked at the card in her hand and then at Frank. "I can't afford an attorney," she said. "I'm not charging you," Frank said with the patience of a man who anticipated this response. "Jenny, you had an uninhabitable dwelling in a life-threatening weather event after documented attempts to contact your landlord. In Minnesota, that's not a gray area. That's a clear statutory violation." He folded his hands. "I'd like your permission to make a call." "To who?" "Gerald Mack," Frank said. "Right now, this morning." Jenny looked at the street behind him, at the 1,000-plus people filling her block, at the motorcycles parked in their precise rows at the camp stove, still going on the sidewalk where a man named Beto was making what appeared to be a genuinely impressive quantity of scrambled eggs. She looked back at Frank. "Make the call," she said. Frank nodded, produced his phone, and walked back down the porch steps. She watched him dial and put the phone to his ear and stand with the particular stillness of someone who knows they have all the leverage in the room and doesn't need to perform it. She didn't hear the conversation. She didn't need to. Inside, Caleb was at the kitchen table eating scrambled eggs that Beto had sent in via a chain of 3 people, and Danny was sitting across from him eating the same, and they were having what appeared to be a serious discussion about whether a triceratops could beat a stegosaurus in a fight. "Triceratops has the horns," Danny said, "but stegosaurus has the spiky tail," Caleb said, with the certainty of someone who has researched this. "The thagomizer," Danny said. Caleb stared at him. "You know what it's called?" "I looked it up," Danny said, and there was something so genuine in it, this 19-year-old, who had spent part of his night on Jenny's floor, looking up dinosaur terminology so he could talk to a 3-year-old at the level the 3-year-old deserved, that Jenny had to turn away for a moment and look at the refrigerator. Mike came through the back door, stomping snow off his boots. He looked at the kitchen table scene, looked at Jenny. "Ortega's done with your car," he said. "New manifold gasket, replaced the thermostat housing while he was in there, checked the belts. It'll get you through another Minnesota winter easy." Jenny turned back from the refrigerator. "Ortega's done," she repeated. "It's 8 in the morning. He started at 5:30, Mike said. "He works fast. I can't pay for the parts. Already handled. Mike." "Jenny." He said her name with a firmness that was not unkind. "Let people do things, that's all. Just let people do things." She pressed her lips together, breathed, let it go. "Frank is calling my landlord," she said. Something moved across Mike's face, approval. She'd learned to read it. "Good. Did you plan that Frank being here?" "Frank goes where Frank thinks he's useful," Mike said. "I can't take credit for Frank." He poured himself coffee, the new pot, the real one, and leaned against the counter. "But I may have mentioned your landlord's situation in the general communication last night." "You may have mentioned it." "Broadly, yes." Jenny looked at him. "What else did you broadly mention?" Mike lifted his coffee cup, said nothing. "Mike, the electric bill situation may have come up," he said, broadly. Jenny felt the specific exhaustion of someone trying to be angry about something that is actively helping them. She pointed at him. "We are going to talk about what you decided on my behalf." "Absolutely," Mike said. "Later." From outside, she heard Frank's voice rise briefly, not heated, but with a precision that carried even through walls, and then go quiet again. Then her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Mack Property Group. She answered it. "Ms. Callahan." Gerald Mack's voice was the voice of a man who had just been walked through a set of facts he very much wished were not facts. "I wanted to personally apologize for the delays in addressing your heating situation. I understand there was a communication breakdown in our office." "Gerald," Jenny said, and her voice was steady, steadier than she expected. Steady the way things get when they've been tested past their limit and found to still be standing. "My son was cold in January in Minnesota. After 3 weeks of messages to your office." Silence. "I understand," Gerald said. "I'd like to discuss." "Frank will be in touch," Jenny said, and she hung up. She stood with the phone in her hand. Her heart was going fast. She had never in her life hung up on a landlord. She had never had the ground under her feet feel solid enough to hang up on anyone who had power over her housing. She looked at the phone, looked at the kitchen, looked at her son explaining the thagomizer to a 19-year-old from Cleveland. She put the phone in her pocket. Then Val appeared in the kitchen doorway and her expression had changed. The direct, efficient energy of earlier was still there, but there was something else in it, too. Something careful. "Jenny," she said, "come out front. There's something you need to see." The tone was not alarming, but it was serious in a way that made Jenny follow without asking questions. She stepped onto the porch. The street had changed while she'd been inside. Not in size, it was still growing, more bikes still turning the corner at a steady trickle, but in configuration. The people who had been dispersed along the block in working groups had shifted, consolidating, and she understood why when she saw what was happening at the end of her driveway. A woman was standing there. She was perhaps 50, unremarkable in her coat and boots, holding a phone up and filming. And next to her was a man with what was clearly a professional camera, not a phone camera, a serious one with a rig and a directional mic. News. Jenny felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. "Local station," Val said quietly from beside her phone. "They picked it up off social media about an hour ago. There are 2 more crews down the block." "No," Jenny said immediately. "No, I'm not." "You don't have to do anything," Val said. "Mike already talked to them. He told them they're on public property and they can film what's on the public street, but nobody goes to your door without your permission." "Okay," Jenny said. "Okay." She breathed. "What are they saying? What's the story they're running with?" Val hesitated for one beat too long. "Val, the story has been going for about 4 hours on social media," Val said. "It's Jenny. It's not just local anymore." Jenny stared at her. "Someone in the club posted last night," Val said carefully. "One of the guys, I think it was Garrett, he put something on his page. Just a few sentences. The furnace, the kid, the door. He tagged the chapter and it got shared, and then..." Val gestured a gesture that encompassed the ineffable velocity of information in the modern world. "It's been shared about 80,000 times." The porch railing was under Jenny's hand. She gripped it. 80,000, she said. "As of 30 minutes ago," Val said. "It's probably more now." Jenny looked at the news camera at the end of her driveway. She looked at the street full of people. She thought about $4.62 and a broken space heater and 45 seconds on the bathroom floor before you stand up. "I'm not a story," she said. Not angrily, just clearly. "No," Val agreed. "You're a person, but sometimes a person does something that becomes a story whether they want it to or not." She paused. "The question is whether you want to have any say in how it gets told." Jenny was quiet for a long time. Then Mike was on the porch, materialized as always, and he stood on her other side, and the 3 of them looked at the street and the cameras and the thousands of people and the pale winter morning sky together. "I don't know how to do this," Jenny said. "I don't know how to be whatever this is." "You already did the hard part," Mike said. "Opening the door." "Opening the door," he confirmed. She was about to respond when Caleb appeared between them, squeezing through to get to the porch railing, and pressed his face between the railings to look at the street and said, "Mommy, there's a camera." "I see it, baby." "Are we on TV?" Jenny looked at the camera. The camera was looking at her. "Might be," she said. "True." Caleb considered this. "Can I wave?" Jenny looked at Mike. Mike looked at the camera. He made a small gesture, barely visible, a tilt of his chin, and the camera pulled back slightly, giving ground. "Not today, bud," Jenny said. "Today we just watch." By 10 in the morning, Frank came back to the porch with his phone and a single sheet of paper he'd had someone print from the copy shop 2 blocks over, which she learned later he'd sent someone on a motorcycle to reach because Frank believed in having things in writing and did not believe in ambiguity. "Gerald Mack is agreeing to the following," Frank said and read from the paper: "full repair and certification of the furnace at his expense, immediate waiver of December and January rent in acknowledgement of the habitability violation repair of the guttering on the east side of the property, and a 12-month lease extension at the current rate with a written maintenance response guarantee of 48 hours. Jenny stared at the paper. "He agreed to all of that," she said. "He agreed to all of that," Frank confirmed in approximately 9 minutes of conversation. He paused with the professional satisfaction of a man who has done good work quickly. I've been practicing law for 23 years. That is the fastest I have ever resolved a landlord dispute. Why did he agree so fast? Frank glanced at the street, at the 1,100 people visible from the porch, at the news cameras, at the motorcycles extending in both directions further than the eye could easily follow. He looked back at Jenny with an expression that suggested the answer was self-evident. Context, Frank said simply. Jenny took the paper, held it in both hands, read it again. 2 months rent, fixed furnace, fixed gutters, 12-month guarantee. She sat down on the porch step because her legs had decided again. Mrs. Paulson appeared at the property line with a fresh plate of something coffee cake. This time she'd gone back inside and baked, which Jenny would think about later as one of the most purely human things she'd ever witnessed, and held it over the low fence with the matter-of-factness of someone delivering a package. "You should eat something," Mrs. Paulson said. "You look like you've been up all night." "I have been up all night," Jenny said. "Well then." Mrs. Paulson held the plate higher. Jenny got up and took it. "Thank you, Eileen." Mrs. Paulson waved a hand. "Don't make it strange." She looked at the street with its thousands of leather-jacketed strangers eating scrambled eggs on the sidewalk and filming things on their phones and repairing a Honda Civic in her neighbor's driveway. She looked at all of it with the equanimity of a woman who had been alive long enough to have seen stranger things, or at least to have decided to behave as though she had. "They're being very tidy about the parking," she said approvingly and went back inside. Jenny sat back down on the porch step and ate coffee cake and held Frank's paper on her knee and watched her street, which was not her street anymore for today. It was something else today, something she didn't have a category for. Danny came and sat beside her. He had Caleb on his back, Caleb's arms around his neck and his legs dangling, Caleb narrating something to the top of Danny's head. "He wants to see the motorcycles up close," Danny said. "I told him I'd ask you." "After breakfast," Jenny said. She said after breakfast. Danny reported upward to Caleb. "What's breakfast?" Caleb demanded. Jenny held up the coffee cake. Caleb's eyes went wide. "Is that cake?" "It's coffee cake." "That's cake," Caleb said with absolute authority. "You're not wrong," Jenny admitted, and broke off a piece and handed it up. They sat there, Jenny on the porch step, Danny beside her with Caleb on his back, eating coffee cake, the sheet of paper on Jenny's knee, the 1,000+ people in the street, the cameras at the end of the driveway, the morning getting lighter and colder and clearer all at once. And it was so much, so impossibly much, that Jenny felt herself go very still and awed it, the way you go still in the center of something that is moving faster than you can track. And then Mike crouched down in front of her. He was holding his phone, and his face had the expression she'd seen at the kitchen table at midnight, that something bigger than surprise look, the haunted awe that didn't sit naturally on a face trained to steadiness. "What?" Jenny said. He turned the phone to face her. It was Garrett's post. The one Val had mentioned, a few sentences, the furnace, the kid, the door. She read it fast, then looked at the number beneath it. 340,000 shares. "That was an hour ago," Mike said. "It's moving." Jenny looked at the number until it stopped being a number and became something abstract, something she couldn't hold in her mind, the way you can't hold the actual size of an ocean in your mind, even standing at its edge. "People are asking," Mike said carefully, "if there's somewhere they can help. People who aren't here, people who can't ride." Jenny looked up from the phone. "What do you mean?" "I mean, there's a woman in Florida who says she can't come to Minnesota, but she wants to do something. I mean, there's a veteran in Texas who's been in his comments for an hour saying someone did something like this for him once, and he wants to pass it on." Mike paused. "I mean, the number of people following this story right now is..." He stopped, chose a different route. "A lot." Jenny set down her coffee cake. "What are they saying?" she said. What is it that they're saying?" Mike was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, it was with the slowness of someone choosing words, because the right words matter, and the wrong ones can break something fragile. "They're saying they didn't know this still happened," he said. "They're saying they forgot people still did things like this for each other." He looked at her. "You opened a door in a blizzard, Jenny, and apparently a lot of people needed to see that. Apparently a lot of people needed to know somebody still would." Jenny put her hand over her mouth, just for a second, then she took it away. "I was scared," she said for the second time, because it still felt important to say, because she didn't want anyone building a story around a version of her that was braver than she actually was. "I know," Mike said for the second time. That's still the whole point. Caleb slid off Danny's back and climbed into Jenny's lap without preamble, the way small children claim territory that is rightfully theirs. And she wrapped her arms around him and held him, and he leaned back against her and looked at the street with calm, wide eyes. "Mommy," he said. "Yeah, baby. Why do they all keep looking at our house?" Jenny tightened her arms around him, felt the weight of him, the realness of him, the complete solid fact of him against her chest. "Because we did something," she said. "Last night, we did something small and it turned into something big." Caleb thought about this. "What did we do?" he said. Jenny pressed her lips to the top of his head. "We opened the door," she said. And from the end of the street, 3 more motorcycles turned the corner, and then 10 more. And the sound of engines filled the morning air like something that had been waiting a long time to arrive. And Jenny sat on her porch step with her son in her lap and Frank's paper and 2 months' rent and a fixed furnace and a Honda Civic that would finally start in the cold, and she held all of it, and did not look away. The last motorcycle arrived at 11:47 in the morning. Jenny knew the exact time because she was looking at her phone when it turned the corner. A single rider older moving slowly, and when he pulled up and cut the engine, a ripple went through the gathered crowd, a kind of collective recognition she couldn't read from the porch. Men who had been standing turned. Men who had been working stopped. Not out of fear, out of something older than fear. Mike went down the porch steps without a word. Jenny watched him walk to the rider, watched the rider pull off his helmet. Gray-haired 70, if he was a day with a face that had been serious for so long, it had grown into that expression permanently. The 2 men stood together for a moment, not embracing, not shaking hands, just talking low and direct, the way men talk when the words matter more than the gesture. Val appeared at Jenny's shoulder. "Who is that?" Jenny said. Val was quiet for 3 full seconds, which for Val was an eternity. "That's Raymond," Val said. "He's been writing since before most of these guys were born. She paused, selecting the right word with care. "He's the reason a lot of these chapters exist the way they do. The reason we have the codes we have about who we help and how." Another pause. "He doesn't write anymore. His hip. He gave it up 2 years ago." Jenny watched the old man and Mike. "Then why?" she started. "Because someone called him," Val said simply. "Someone told him what happened here, and he got on his bike for the first time in 2 years and rode 4 hours from Wisconsin." Val's voice was quiet but perfectly even. "Raymond doesn't do things for show. If he came, it means this mattered to him at a level that doesn't have an easy explanation." Mike turned and brought Raymond toward the porch, and Jenny straightened, without deciding to the way you straighten when something in the air tells you that the person approaching deserves that instinctive acknowledgement. Raymond stopped at the porch steps. He looked at Jenny with eyes that had seen enough of the world to have stopped being impressed by most of it. He looked at her the way an old craftsman looks at a piece of work seriously without flattery, finding the actual thing. "You're the one who opened the door," he said. "Yes, sir," Jenny said. She didn't know why she said sir. It came out naturally. Raymond nodded once. "Good," he said, like that was everything. Like that single word completed a sentence that had been waiting a long time to be finished. He looked past her at Caleb, who was standing in the doorway eating the last of Mrs. Paulson's coffee cake with both hands. "That your boy," Raymond said. "That's Caleb." Raymond looked at Caleb for a long moment. Caleb looked back at him with the clear, uncomplicated gaze of a child who has not yet learned to find old people less interesting than everyone else. "Hi," Caleb said. "Hi yourself," Raymond said. "Did you ride a motorcycle?" "I did." "Val said you don't ride anymore." Raymond glanced at Val with an expression that was not quite a smile but lived in the same neighborhood. "Val talks too much," he said. "He rode today," Caleb said with the tone of a child delivering a verdict. "Because of us." Raymond looked at the boy for another moment. Then he looked at Jenny. "Smart kid," he said. "Every minute of every day," Jenny confirmed. Raymond put one hand briefly on the porch railing, not leaning on it, just touching it. A brief contact, and then he turned and went back to Mike, and the 2 of them moved into the crowd, and Jenny watched them go and felt the particular weight of having been seen by someone who did not see things lightly. Inside the house, her phone was ringing again. She let it ring. It had been ringing for 2 hours, numbers she didn't recognize, the area codes from states she'd never been to. Rosa had fielded most of them, moving through Jenny's house with her clipboard like a field coordinator, who had been preparing for exactly this situation her entire career, which in some ways Jenny was beginning to understand she had been. Rosa appeared in the doorway. "Jenny, there's a call you need to take." "Rosa, I've told you I'm not doing interviews." "It's not an interview," Rosa said. "It's a woman named Patricia Chen. She's the director of a nonprofit in Minneapolis, single-parent housing assistance." She saw the story. Rosa held out Jenny's phone. "She'd like to talk to you about a position." Jenny stared at the phone. "A position," she said. "Community outreach coordinator," Rosa said. She says, and I'm quoting directly, that she's been trying to hire someone for 8 months who understands the experience of the people they'd be serving from the inside, not from a textbook. Rosa's expression was careful, deliberate, the expression of someone delivering information and resisting the urge to editorialize. "The salary she mentioned is more than your 3 jobs combined." The phone sat in Rosa's outstretched hand between them. Jenny heard the street outside. She heard Caleb ask Danny something, and Danny answer. She heard Mrs. Paulson's voice somewhere, apparently having made her way into the crowd with her empty plate and her complete absence of intimidation. She took the phone. "This is Jenny," she said. The woman on the other end had a voice that was warm and precise, in equal measure, the voice of someone who had been in a great many difficult conversations and had learned that directness is its own form of kindness. "Ms. Callahan, I'll be brief because I understand this is not a normal day for you," Patricia Chen said. "I've spent the last 2 hours reading everything I can find about your situation. I've also spent the last 2 hours thinking about the fact that the woman our organization has been looking for, someone who has lived the reality our clients face, who understands it from the inside, who has the instinct to make the hard call when everything is against her, has apparently been in Duluth this whole time working 3 jobs. Jenny turned away from the doorway, moved to the window, looked at the street. "I don't have a degree," Jenny said, her first instinct to offer her own disqualifications before someone else found them. 3 years of going it alone had trained her to preemptively concede. "I know," Patricia said. "I don't require one for this role. I require exactly what you demonstrated last night." A pause. "Can we meet this week when things settle down? No pressure, no commitment, just a conversation." Jenny held the phone and looked at her street full of 3,000 people who had come because one person told a small true story about a door being opened, and she thought about the 45-second rule. She thought about counting it out and then standing up. "Yes," she said, "we can meet." She ended the call, stood for a moment with the phone in her hand and her back to the room, and let the sighs of the last 12 hours move through her in one long wave top to bottom, the way you let cold water hit you and then stand in it until it's just water. Then she went back outside. Danny was showing Caleb the motorcycles. He'd taken him down to the street holding his hand, and they were moving slowly along the road closest to the house, Caleb reaching out to touch the chrome on the nearest one with one careful finger, like touching something sacred. The owner of that bike, a large man with a shaved head and a tattoo that covered most of his neck, was crouched beside Caleb, explaining the throttle not because anyone asked him to, but because a child was curious, and curiosity deserves to be met. Jenny watched her son and felt something unlock in her chest that she realized had been locked for 3 years, not all of it. Some locks take longer, but something. Mike found her at the edge of the porch. "We'll start clearing out around 2, he said. "Give you your street back." "You don't have to rush," Jenny said. He looked at her. "You sure?" "I'm sure." He nodded. "Raymond wants to say something before we go. To the group, if that's all right with you." Jenny looked at the old man who had ridden 4 hours on a hip that couldn't take it, who hadn't been on a motorcycle in 2 years, who had come anyway. "It's all right," she said. At noon, Raymond stood in the street, not elevated, not on a platform, just standing, and the crowd organized itself around him with a naturalness that suggested this had happened before, that these people knew how to be an audience for this particular man. He didn't speak loudly, but the crowd was quiet enough that he didn't need to. "I've been in this life a long time," Raymond said, "longer than most of you've been alive. And I've seen a lot of things done in the name of brotherhood and loyalty and all the words we use for why we show up for each other." He paused. "But I want to be honest with you about something. Most of the time we show up for each other, for our own. That's what it means to belong to something." He stopped. The street was absolutely still. "Last night," Raymond said, "a woman who didn't belong to anything we recognize, who didn't have any claim on us, who had every reason in the world to keep her door shut, opened it. He let that sit. She did it scared. She did it with $4 in her pocket and a 3-year-old kid and a broken furnace. And she did it because someone was cold. Jenny was holding the porch railing with both hands. I want you to remember this day, Raymond said. Not because of us. We're easy to remember. There's a lot of us, and we're loud. A wave of something moved through the crowd, not quite laughter, something warmer. I want you to remember that a 31-year-old woman who works 3 jobs and never asks anybody for anything chose at the hardest moment of a hard year to be the kind of person who opens the door. He looked toward the porch, toward Jenny. And because she was that person, all of this happened. He was quiet. Then he said simply, "That's the whole sermon." The crowd was silent for a moment. Then someone started it. She couldn't see, who couldn't find the origin, but a sound rose from 1,000 throats. Not a cheer exactly, something more resonant than a cheer, something that she felt in the bones of her chest, and it built and built, and she gripped the railing, and Caleb came running up the porch steps and grabbed her leg and shouted, "Mommy, they're loud!" And she laughed, really laughed, the first full laugh in longer than she could accurately remember. Val was beside her, and Rosa and Frank and Danny had come back up the steps too, and Mrs. Paulson had appeared from somewhere in the crowd and was standing at the base of the porch steps looking unreasonably pleased with herself and still holding her empty plate. And Mike was at the edge of the porch watching her. When the sound finally faded, Jenny found she had nothing to say, which was unusual for her. So she said the true thing, which was, "I don't know how to thank you." "Stop working 3 jobs, Mike said. "That would be a start." She almost laughed again. "That's simple." "Nothing about it is simple," he said, "but you've got some new options now. Use them." He held her gaze. "You're not alone in this, Jenny. You weren't before last night. You just didn't know it yet. That's all last night did. It showed you what was already true." Jenny thought about something being true before you knew it, about the network of people and possibility that had been there all along, invisible, waiting for one door to open and let the light in both directions. "Will I hear from you?" she said. "After." "If you want to," Mike said. "I want to." "Then yes." Danny came to say goodbye, and the goodbye lasted longer than goodbyes usually do, because Caleb would not release his hand and kept finding new information to convey about Triceratops, about the Thagomizer, about a book he had that Danny should probably read if he was going to have informed opinions about dinosaurs. Danny listened to all of it. He listened to all of it, and then he crouched down and looked Caleb in the eye and said, "I'll remember, I promise." "You have to," Caleb said seriously, "because I'll ask you next time." Danny stood up. He looked at Jenny. His face was the face of someone who has received something unexpected and doesn't know yet how large it is, but understands it's larger than he can currently measure. "Thank you," he said, "for last night, for talking to me." "Thank you for talking back," Jenny said. He went down the steps. He turned once quick, without ceremony, and then he was gone into the crowd. They left the way they came, in procession, methodical, the sound building, as engines started in sequence and then moved away down the street in waves. It took 40 minutes for the street to clear. Jenny stood on her porch, the whole time Caleb on her hip, even though he was getting too heavy for that, his head on her shoulder, watching the motorcycles go. At one point he said, "Are they going to come back?" "Maybe someday," Jenny said. "I hope so," he said. "I like the big beard man." "Me too," Jenny said. When the last engine sound faded, not all at once, but gradually thinning out until it was just the winter air and the ordinary sounds of her street, Jenny stood on her empty porch and looked at what was left. Her street looked exactly like it always looked. You couldn't have told from looking what had happened here. There was no damage, no mess, no sign that thousands of people had occupied this space for 6 hours. They had been, as Mrs. Paulson had noted, very tidy about the parking. Rosa had left her a folder on the kitchen table before she left. The folder contained Frank's agreement with Gerald Mack notarized, a list of follow-up contacts including Patricia Chen's direct number, a printout of Shepard's repair notes for the furnace dated and signed for her records, and a handwritten note from Rosa herself that said, "Only you have our numbers. Use them. This is not optional." Jenny stood in her kitchen and held the folder and felt the weight of it, not the paper weight, the other weight, the weight of not being alone, which turns out to be heavier than you expect when you have been carrying the alternative for a long time. She put the folder in the kitchen drawer. the one she never opened because opening it made her stomach hurt. She opened it. She put the folder in. She left the drawer open. Caleb was at the kitchen table with his dinosaur book, turning pages with purpose, looking for something specific. Danny needs to read about the Spinosaurus, Caleb said. For next time. You can tell him next time, Jenny said. When is next time? I don't know exactly, Jenny said, but there will be one. Caleb accepted this and went back to his book. Jenny stood in her kitchen, in her warm house with the drawer open, and a job interview scheduled, and a car that would start in the cold, and 2 months of rent forgiven, and a legal agreement on her side and a folder full of phone numbers she was not going to be too proud to use, and she stood very still in all of it for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and called the diner. Cheryl, she said when her manager answered. It's Jenny. I need to talk to you about my schedule. I think I need to make some changes. Cheryl was quiet for a second. Then, honey, I saw the news. Take whatever time you need. Jenny breathed in. Not time off, she said, just less. I think I can finally do less. She hung up and stood in the warm kitchen in the warm house while her son read about dinosaurs at the table, and outside the street was quiet and ordinary, and the furnace ran steadily and reliably in the basement, doing its job, holding the cold back the way it was always supposed to, the way it should have been doing all along. She had opened a door in the dark, and the whole world had walked through it toward her. That was the truth of it. Not the thousands of motorcycles, not the cameras, not the shared post, or the legal agreement, or the job offer, or the repaired car, or the 2 months of rent. Those were the consequences. The truth was simpler and older and would still be true long after everything else faded. One person, frightened and exhausted and down to her last $4, chose to meet a stranger's desperation with her own humanity. And that choice, that single, terrified, courageous choice, was enough. It was always going to be enough. It is always enough.